It was a stuffy spring afternoon in Los Angeles, and the city buzzed with life as always. Cars sped down wide avenues, the city lights flickered, and the sun was slowly setting behind the distant mountains. But inside Chang & Co., a towering, glass and steel building that reflected the cold, modern world, the atmosphere was even more oppressive. David Chang sat in his leather chair, staring at the stack of papers in front of him. He had always been a calculated businessman, used to making tough choices to reach his goals. The only son of a powerful family, his life had always been a string of victories and accomplishments. But that day felt different. The familiar pressure weighed on his shoulders more heavily than ever before. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was his mother, the matriarch of the Chang family, her voice deep and unyielding as always. "David, we need to talk about the future of the company and your grandfather's inheritance." He sighed, recognizing her tone. His mother had always been direct, never one to beat around the bush, and she always knew exactly how to apply pressure. She never cared about his feelings, only the interests of the family. That was how things worked. "What do I have to do now, Mom?" David asked, his voice muffled, trying to hide the frustration he felt. "You know the inheritance will only be transferred when you get married, right?" she said, emotionless. "And time is running out. We have to take care of this. I found someone." The word someone sounded hollow, like a simple box to check. But David knew exactly what it meant. His mother had found the woman he would have to marry to secure the company's future. She didn't care whether he loved her or not. What mattered was that she was suitable. David was used to these kinds of demands, but something inside him resisted. He hated being treated like a piece on the family's chessboard, but he knew he had no choice. Without the marriage, the inheritance would slip through his fingers, and with it, all the power and influence that came with the fortune. "Who is she?" David asked, his voice colder now. "Sarah Johnson. She's a simple woman with no great resources, but with a good heart and a story of resilience. She has a connection to your grandmother. It's a strategic choice, my son. She'll serve the purpose." David's mother had always known how to manipulate words, to make even the cruelest decisions sound like opportunities. But he was tired of it. The feeling of being a pawn in life's game disturbed him deeply. "I'll meet her tomorrow," he said, hanging up without saying goodbye. Night fell quickly in Los Angeles, and David walked through the busy streets, unsure whether he was more exhausted from his work or from his life. He reflected on the arranged marriage he was about to face. He knew nothing about Sarah Johnson, only what his mother had told him, a simple woman with a story of survival. But what he wanted most was for this story to have a different ending. Sarah Johnson, he thought. She would be just another piece in this dirty game. But if it meant securing the inheritance, it had to be done. He couldn't afford to fail. And it didn't matter who she was. The next morning, the meeting was arranged. David met her at a small cafe on the outskirts of Los Angeles, a place far from the lights and grandeur he was used to. When he walked in, Sarah's eyes fixed on him, but she didn't seem surprised or nervous. She was seated at the table with a cup of coffee in her hand, as if it were just another ordinary day. She was beautiful, but not in the way he had expected. She wasn't the glamorous woman he had imagined as the wife of a man like him. Her face was simple, but carried a strength he couldn't quite explain. She wasn't imposing, but there was something about her that made David feel like he was in unfamiliar territory. Sarah watched him calmly, waiting for him to take the lead. When he finally spoke, his voice was direct, but lacked the aggressive tone he usually used in business. "You know why I'm here, don't you?" he asked, watching her closely. She simply nodded, unsurprised, as if she already knew what was coming. "Yes, I know," she replied, her voice soft, but with a firmness David hadn't expected. "Your family wants us to get married so you can inherit the fortune, right?" David was taken aback by her honesty. It wasn't what he expected. He was used to women who tried to take advantage of his status or played hard to get to manipulate the situation. But Sarah seemed different. She wasn't there to please him. She wasn't there to be submissive. She had an intense gaze, a look he didn't quite know how to handle. "Yes," David replied again. "I have a proposal for you. If you marry me, you'll have a comfortable future. There's no love involved, this is just a formality. But I need you to agree." Sarah looked at him carefully, in no rush to answer. For a moment the silence between them felt heavy. She was deciding what to do with a proposal that seemed to come from another world. "I don't have much to lose, do I?" she finally said, her tone calm but with a hint of bitterness. "If this gives me a chance to improve my life, who am I to say no?" David watched her, his heart beating a little faster than usual. Something about her seemed to challenge him, but he didn't yet know exactly what it was. "I wasn't expecting that answer," he said, with a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. She shrugged slightly, almost smiling, but the smile never fully formed. She was tired of waiting for opportunities, tired of fighting alone. Maybe this was the chance she needed. "Then let's do it," she said, finally accepting the proposal. Their future was set, and both of them knew that what happened next could change their lives in ways they couldn't imagine. But in that moment, as their eyes met, it was clear that something more was about to unfold, something no one could predict. The wedding was set for 2 weeks from now, but for Sarah it felt as though time had slowed down. Each passing day dragged on, as if the weight of the decision had become a shadow, growing larger and more imposing as the big day approached. She had accepted what had been proposed to her, but in her mind, doubts kept multiplying. Was this what she wanted for her life? A loveless marriage, with no promise of happiness, just a contract of convenience that would guarantee financial stability? The idea of giving herself to a man who saw her as nothing more than a means to an end deeply unsettled her. But what else could she do? Her family had never been wealthy, and she had always struggled to survive, to attain the bare minimum of comfort. Now she had a chance to change all of that. And David seemed like a man without emotions, without any trace of humanity, beyond his ambitions. Sarah began to work on what would be her role as David's wife, or more precisely, the role of being the wife of a man she barely knew. She found herself buying a simple wedding dress, something more practical than romantic, yet still a symbol of something she couldn't avoid. The image of herself in the mirror, the dress fitted to her body, brought a tightness to her chest. She didn't want to be there. She didn't want to be part of a charade. But when she looked into her mother's eyes, proud and full of expectations, she knew she couldn't turn back. David, on the other hand, didn't seem to care about the details. He was absorbed in his negotiations, in his company, and the wedding seemed to be nothing more than a formality to him. He sat in the large living room of his apartment, looking over papers while the city buzzed outside. The weight of carrying his family's legacy already consumed him entirely. But something about Sarah unsettled him. It wasn't just the fact that she was different from the women he was used to dealing with. It was something more subtle. Resistance he couldn't quite understand. They hadn't seen each other again since the proposal, and although the wedding was imminent, the distance between them seemed to grow. Sarah appeared anxious, uncomfortable, but at the same time she carried a dignity that threw him off balance. She wasn't there to please him. She wasn't there to be a submissive or decorative wife. On the eve of the wedding, David decided to make one last attempt to break the ice. He invited her to dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown, with no romantic pretense, just to talk. "I thought it would be easier," he said after a long silence as they watched the waiters place the dishes on the table. Sarah looked at him for a moment, then turned her eyes away. The restaurant was luxurious, but everything about it felt so empty to her, so meaningless. The food, the expensive wines, the dazzling atmosphere, it was all just a facade hiding the real reason they were there. "Easy?" she replied, her voice low and emotionless. "You think this would be easy for me? You're a man who has everything, and I'm a woman who has nothing but her word." David remained silent, surprised by her response. He hadn't expected her to be so direct, so unshaken by his coldness. "I don't intend to make things difficult for you, Sarah. I just—" He hesitated, trying to find the right words. "I don't understand why you're so resistant to this. You already have what you wanted. I'm an opportunity for you." Sarah lifted her eyes to him, fixing him with a serious, almost defiant stare. "I didn't ask for this, David. I didn't ask for your opportunity or your money. You don't know me. You don't know anything about me, about my life. You don't know what it's like to fight every day just to survive. You don't know what it's like to be treated like I'm an object." She paused, and for a moment David saw a pain in her expression he never would have imagined. It was as if she had spoken with her entire soul, and he, who had always had everything, was incapable of understanding the depth of her words. "I know I can't change what you see me as," she continued, her voice now a bit softer yet still firm. "But don't think I'll be just a woman who accepts your opportunity without fighting for what's mine. I'm not a prize. I'm not your solution." David swallowed hard, feeling a strange tension building between them. He wanted to respond. He wanted to argue, to justify his actions, but the words simply wouldn't come. It was as if, for the first time in his life, someone had truly seen him, not caring about what he had or the image he projected. "I didn't want you to feel that way," he finally said, more sincerely than he cared to admit. "I just don't know how to deal with this. I've never been in a situation like this before." Sarah watched him for a moment. It was clear he had no real idea of what she was going through, but the fact that he admitted it somehow made her see that he wasn't just the cold, calculating man she had imagined. "I know. And I don't know what to do with all of this, either," she replied. "But what I do know is that, whatever comes, I'm not going to lose who I am in the process." Her gaze was resolute, and for a moment David felt a respect for her he had never anticipated. It was no longer just about the inheritance or the marriage. It was about who she truly was. As the night went on, silence settled between them again, but this time the weight of the moment felt different. They were both preparing for something that would change their lives in ways they still couldn't fully understand. The wedding day arrived without much fanfare, but with the pomp the situation demanded. The setting was a luxurious hotel in downtown Los Angeles, with a panoramic view that seemed to split the city in half. The white and gold walls of the hall reflected the soft afternoon light, while elegant flowers decorated the space impeccably. To all the eyes around, it was the kind of dream wedding, perfect, sophisticated, and immaculate. But to Sarah, it was all just a grand stage, an empty spectacle she didn't want to be part of. While the brides around her seemed emotional, she felt a weight on her chest. The white dress felt more like a prison than a symbol of happiness. The veil, carefully placed over her hair, didn't cover the unrest in her eyes. David, on the other hand, was calm, almost impassive. His eyes were fixed straight ahead, his demeanour as distant as always. He wore a flawless suit, the collar perfectly fitted, his hair tied back in a formal, controlled style. He was used to events of such scale. The ceremony to him was just another ritual to fulfill. There was no emotion, no expectation. It was merely the quickest and most effective way to secure what his family demanded, the inheritance. All eyes were on them. It was a celebration the Los Angeles elite had been waiting for. After all, David Chang, one of the most powerful and influential men in the business world, was getting married. And Sarah, a young woman with no great wealth but a past marked by struggle, now found herself part of this world of luxury. But as the vows were exchanged, Sarah felt her soul drift further and further from the reality she was living. David's words, empty and mechanical, carried no weight. He wasn't there. For her, he was there out of obligation. The "I do" he said at the altar was as cold as his gaze. To him, this was a transaction, not a moment of union. "I take you as my wife," he said, with a tone that held no emotion whatsoever. Sarah, with a slight hesitation, also said her "I do," but in her heart, she knew it didn't represent love, just surrender to pressure and circumstance. After the ceremony, the guests made their way to the reception hall, where the celebrations continued with champagne, forced laughter, and hollow conversations. People were happy because appearances were being maintained. David Chang and Sarah Johnson were married, and that was all that mattered to the outside world. Sarah tried to blend in with the guests, but everything felt artificial. Every smile she gave was just a mask. She was trying to find some meaning in that sea of smiling faces, but couldn't. The high society women looked at her with curiosity, some with a hint of disdain in their eyes. She was an outsider there, an intruder. She felt alone, despite being surrounded by people. David, on the other hand, seemed to be enjoying himself. He greeted his business associates and friends with the ease of someone used to being the center of attention. He was used to being in control, to being admired. But Sarah could see that, despite his smiles, there was a disconnect in his gaze. He was there, but not truly present. He seemed lost in his own thoughts, calculating something she couldn't understand. After dinner, the guests began to disperse. The compliments to Sarah were polite but empty. No one seemed to really care about her, the woman David Chang had just brought into his life, like an acquired item, a necessary accessory to maintain appearances. When the last guest left and the door to the hall closed behind them, silence took over the space. The sound of cheerful music that had filled the air was gone, replaced by the emptiness that now consumed the newlyweds. David was the first to rise from the table, adjusting his jacket as he looked at Sarah, who stood motionless. She felt exhaustion taking over her body, but her mind was still in turmoil. How did she feel at that moment? Disappointed? Yes. Desolate? Perhaps. But above all, she felt alone, more alone than ever. "I hope it was to your liking," David said, with a polite but cold smile. He was trying to keep up appearances, as he always did. Sarah looked at him, unsure how to react. What was she supposed to say? What did he want to hear? She was tired of trying to be the perfect wife for a man who didn't see her as anything more than a means to an end. "It was all perfect," she replied, with veiled irony in her voice. David observed her for a moment, his eyes narrowing. He noticed something in her, something he hadn't seen before. Maybe it was the glimmer of resistance in her eyes, the way she was facing the situation with a strength he couldn't understand. He didn't know what Sarah truly wanted, but her coldness unsettled him. He was used to manipulating situations, to controlling everything around him. But Sarah, she didn't fit his mold, and that made him uncomfortable, more than he was willing to admit. "If you need anything, just let me know," he said, giving her a courteous smile before turning and walking to the door, leaving her alone in the empty hall. Sarah remained there, alone, in the middle of that grand space, but feeling smaller than ever. She knew the marriage was just beginning, but the emptiness inside her only grew. The days following the wedding passed slowly, as if Sarah's world was in slow motion. She was in the marriage, but not part of it. Her life seemed to have frozen the moment she said, "I do," and now she found herself immersed in a routine that felt utterly pointless. David was always busy, coming and going with his business affairs, barely making time for even a single dinner together. He treated her with the courtesy of a husband, but not with the attention she longed for, or even the bare minimum of interest. The feeling of being invisible all the time was deeply unsettling, but something was changing. Sarah didn't know exactly what, but a subtle shift was happening inside her. She started to realize that David's behavior wasn't just a reflection of indifference, but perhaps something deeper, more complex than she had imagined. There were moments when she watched him, moments when, for a second, he seemed to drop the businessman facade and simply be human. He never treated her with hostility, but always with a distance she didn't know how to bridge. She, in turn, also felt distant from him. Sarah knew he was keeping his distance for a reason. Perhaps the weight of his own expectations, or the demands of his family, and although she wanted more, she knew she was in a position where she needed to be patient. However, one afternoon, weeks after the wedding, things changed. David asked her to accompany him to a business meeting. It was something simple, without much formality, but he thought it would be good for her to start getting more involved in the world he dominated. Sarah didn't really know what to expect, but she accepted, eager to break the lonely routine her life had become. The meeting took place in an elegant corporate office with panoramic views of the city. The smell of coffee was strong in the air, while the space buzzed with voices discussing numbers and strategies. Sarah felt out of place, sitting at the edge of the table, listening attentively as others talked about markets, investments, and new acquisitions. But as time went by, she began to notice something that deeply bothered her. David was disconnected in his own bubble, barely paying attention to those around him. He seemed more focused on control than on the people. After the meeting, as the others left, Sarah approached him, not entirely sure what to say. He was organizing his papers, wearing his usual expression, serious, focused, but cold. "Do you even realize how hard it is to connect with you?" she asked without thinking, her voice low but firm. David looked at her, surprised, but didn't respond immediately. He was used to women who smiled, who pretended to understand his world, but Sarah wasn't like that. She wasn't there to please him. She was there simply to be seen. "I don't know what you mean," he replied, but his voice, once firm, now sounded a bit softer, as if he were allowing himself to listen. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling a mix of frustration and courage. She couldn't stay silent anymore, couldn't keep hiding behind the mask of the perfect wife everyone expected her to be. "You're always so distant. I keep wondering if you even realize that," she said, her tone more neutral, but her words carried something deeply personal. He watched her for a long moment, as if trying to truly understand what she meant. Maybe it was the first time someone had spoken to him like that. He was used to being the leader, the boss, the man everyone revered. And though her bluntness unsettled him, there was something in this confrontation that made him reflect. It was strange, something he didn't know how to process. "I have no idea what you expect from me, Sarah," he finally said, his voice now more sincere than before. "I've never known how to deal with this kind of intimacy. I'm not good at connecting with people that way." Sarah, surprised by the honesty, remained silent. She had always believed David had a heart of stone, that he was closed off and distant, but hearing that from his own mouth, it felt different. He wasn't just trying to dodge the conversation, he was genuinely trying to understand. "I'm not asking you to open up overnight, David," she replied, now speaking more gently. "I just want you to understand that all of this is strange for me too. I don't know how to handle it either. But maybe we can try to be more than just a formality. Maybe we can try somehow to understand each other." David looked at her for a few more seconds in silence. Something about her was getting to him, something he couldn't fully identify. He was used to having control over everything, but Sarah seemed to be challenging that structure, challenging his way of seeing things. "Maybe," he said, finally breaking the silence. "Maybe we can try. I don't know how, but we can. See what happens." Sarah didn't know if that meant anything, but at least it was a beginning. She felt a slight hope begin to grow inside her, something she didn't expect. There were no promises, no guarantees, but there was the possibility of something more, something she never thought she could have. In the following days, Sarah and David started spending more time together. He began to open up a little more of his world to her, and she, in turn, started to feel more comfortable in his presence. It wasn't love, not yet, nor affection, but something new was emerging, something fragile, something that could become more, and maybe, just maybe, that was what they needed to start writing a new story together. No longer a story of convenience, but a story of discovery, of possibility. Life after the wedding unfolded in a way that, for Sarah, was almost a surprise. She had never imagined she could feel so restrained. The daily routine, now shared with David, was filled with silence and formality, and yet a strange sense of intimacy had started to grow between them. Nothing romantic, nothing passionate, but a genuine, albeit subtle, connection was beginning to form. David, as closed off as he was, seemed to be slowly starting to open up to her. Sarah didn't care much for words or grand gestures. What mattered to her was the truth behind each act, the sincerity behind every glance. Even if David still couldn't openly express his emotions, she was beginning to notice subtle details, like how he spent more time with her after work, as if he were trying to build a shared routine, even if uncertainly. But one morning, weeks after the wedding, everything changed. Sarah was home alone as usual. She tried to focus on a book, but her mind kept wandering. She knew something was hidden behind the facade of a perfect marriage that everyone else saw. There was something about David, something he hadn't told her. And as always, her curiosity consumed her. That's when she stumbled upon a letter by accident. It wasn't a typical envelope. It was hidden in a drawer she had never opened before, in David's office. The letter was partially torn, as if it had been stored, in a hurry. She hesitated for a moment, but something urged her to open it. It was an old letter, written in a serious and formal tone. Sarah didn't recognize the sender, but what shocked her most were the contents. The letter spoke about an inheritance agreement, a legacy with very specific conditions. David's name was mentioned, but not in the way she had imagined. 2. Secure the Chang family legacy and the continuity of the empire, the marriage must be conducted with a woman of humble lineage, without great ambitions. The letter continued, detailing the relationship between David's family and Sarah's in an enigmatic way. What did that mean? She didn't know, but something about it made her shiver. The letter seemed to confirm what she had already suspected. David was trapped in a web of family expectations, forced to follow a path he hadn't chosen. But the biggest surprise came at the end of the letter. A secret, vital information about the real reason behind the marriage. This woman, Sarah Johnson, is the key to your grandfather's inheritance. Her real name is Sarah Chang, daughter of one of the family's closest allies. She is part of the agreement that will ensure the Chang fortune remains in the right hands. Sarah froze as she read those words. She was the daughter of someone connected to the Chang family. How was that possible? Her mother had never mentioned anything about it. She had never known she had such a deep connection to that world of wealth and power. What did that mean for her? And why had David never mentioned it? With her heart racing, Sarah didn't know what to do with the information. Should she confront him immediately? Or would it be better to wait and try to understand what it all truly meant? She looked around the office, feeling like an intruder, as if she had crossed an invisible line that separated David's world from her own. The decision to confront him didn't take long. She needed to understand. She needed to know the truth. Hours. Later, at the end of the day when David came home, Sarah was already waiting for him, sitting on the couch, the letter in her hand. He looked at her, surprised, but quickly noticed the serious tone in her gaze. "What is it, Sarah?" he asked, his expression trying to mask the apprehension. Sarah didn't let him get away with a simple greeting. She held the letter firmly and looked at him, her eyes fixed. "I found this," she said, her voice tense, "and I need you to explain it to me." David remained silent for a moment, clearly stunned. His eyes scanned the letter quickly, and he realized there was no point in denying it. Something in him gave way, and he sat beside her, his expression hard. "I knew this would come out sooner or later," he said, his voice muted. "I should have been honest with you from the beginning." Sarah watched him, feeling a mix of anger and confusion. The last thing she expected was to hear the words honest and David Chang so close together. "I'm the son of a man who was one of your grandfather's closest allies," he began, looking at her. "My father helped him build the empire you were meant to inherit. The inheritance agreement was made between them, and I was placed in a position where I had no choice. I had to marry you. But not because someone said you were the right woman for me, but because this marriage ensures the family's fortune stays intact." Sarah felt a knot form in her throat. He was admitting that the marriage had never been about what she hoped or wanted. He married her because his family chose her as part of a strategy, an essential piece to maintain power and wealth. "Why did you never tell me this?" she asked, her voice quieter now but full of pain. David closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of truth finally crash down on him. He knew that moment would change everything, that the trust she had placed in him might shatter then and there, but he also knew he couldn't keep hiding. "Because I didn't want you to feel like just a pawn in this game," he said, his voice faltering slightly. "I wanted, at least, to try to build something real between us, but I know I was selfish in not telling you the truth from the start." Sarah didn't know what to say. She wanted to scream, to cry, but the words wouldn't come. The lie he had told her was too big to ignore, and yet she understood the pressure he was under. But that didn't make the pain any less. He didn't see her as a full human being, but as a piece in a game of power. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The silence was heavy, loaded with the pain of unspoken words and the weight of the reality now surrounding them. Sarah finally stood up, the letter still in her hand. I need time to think, she said, her voice trembling but determined. I don't know what to do with all of this right now. David watched her walk away, knowing that everything he had tried to build had just crumbled. What would be left between them now? What would remain of the trust she had once placed? In him? The silence between Sarah and David was palpable in the days following the discovery of the secret. Sarah had emotionally distanced herself, her mind racing. She knew she had been deceived, not just by David, but by his family, by a system that treated her as disposable. To her, the truth had been a bomb, one that shattered not only her view of their marriage, but her entire concept of trust. David, on the other hand, didn't know how to react. He could see the pain in Sarah's eyes, the disillusionment with him, and with the situation they were both trapped in. But the truth was, he didn't know how to change any of it. He had been shaped by a lifetime of family expectations, by an inheritance that dictated who he was supposed to be. Now, with the weight of truth on his shoulders, he felt powerless in front of the woman he was beginning to respect, and, in some way, to admire. It was a grey, cloudy morning when the inevitable conflict finally unfolded. The phone rang in David's office, interrupting his thoughts. He answered, knowing it was an important call, something related to the family business. "David, you need to be home tonight," said his mother's cold voice, as always. "We have to discuss the future of the company. It's time to talk about succession." David sighed. He had known the pressure would come sooner or later. His mother never failed to remind him of the responsibility he carried. The family's future, the investments, the fortune, everything depended on the decisions he made. And that meant he didn't have the luxury of feeling things, of getting lost in complicated emotions. "I'll be there," was all he said, before hanging up. When he got home that night, the atmosphere was heavy with tension. Sarah was in the living room, but her body language was closed off, distant. She looked at him with a cold stare, as if he were a stranger. "Where were you?" she asked, her voice low but laced with accusation. David didn't know how to respond right away. He had grown used to the pressure, to the idea that things needed to be done according to the family's demands. But as he looked at Sarah, something inside him told him she no longer deserved to be treated like a disposable pawn. She was a person with a story, with feelings, with dreams of her own. And he had dragged her into this game without ever really caring about the impact. "I had to go to the office," he finally replied. "But that doesn't matter now." Sarah stood up, her expression tense. She was no longer willing to accept the same old excuses. She knew there was more at stake than just the family business, and she could no longer remain silent. "You never understood, did you, David?" she said, her voice trembling with frustration. "To you, this was always about inheritance, power, and control. But for me, it's about dignity. You can't just use me like a playing card in a game you never even let me understand." David felt a tightness in his chest. He wanted to tell her he loved her, that everything had changed, but the words wouldn't come. He knew what she was. Saying was true, but he was still trapped in the structure of his family, in the legacy he had to protect at all costs. And as much as he was beginning to care for Sarah in ways he didn't yet understand, he couldn't simply throw everything away. "I don't know what you expect from me, Sarah," he said, his voice breaking. "I have to follow what was given to me, what was imposed on me. It's not that simple." Sarah looked at him, feeling a mixture of anger and sorrow. She knew he was trapped, but that didn't excuse the way he treated her. What more could she do? She had tried to understand, to give him a chance, but he didn't seem willing to change. "I don't want to be part of a lie, David," she replied, the words sharper than she'd intended. I don't want to live my whole life being a chess piece in your game of power. David watched her in silence, trying to find the right words, but he knew that everything he'd said so far had been in vain. The truth was there, raw and unfiltered, standing between them. They were losing something far more precious than the family fortune. They were losing the chance to understand each other, to be real with each other. But before he could say anything else, Sarah's phone rang. She looked at the screen, and her eyes narrowed. "It's my mum," she said, more to herself than to David. She took a deep breath and answered. "Sarah?" Her mother's voice was full of urgency. "I need you to come home now. There's something you need to know about your father." Sarah felt a chill run through her. She knew her mother only spoke like that when something serious was happening. She hung up and looked at David, her expression now even more tense. "I need to go," she said, offering no further explanation. David stood up, wanting to say something, but no words came. He knew this was a pivotal moment. She was about to learn something that could change everything between them, something that involved not just her inheritance, but the very legacy of her family. Sarah grabbed her bag and left quickly, leaving David there once again, alone with his thoughts. He knew the distance between them was growing, and he didn't know if there was anything he could do to stop it. The air was heavy when Sarah arrived at her mother's house. Something was wrong. She felt it with every step she took, the anxiety growing in her chest. The house, which had once always been a refuge of safety, now felt vast and cold. When she stepped through the door, her mother was waiting in the living room, her face serious and her hands trembling, as if she were on the verge of revealing a secret that could no longer be kept. "Mom, what happened?" Sarah asked, hearing the weight of worry in her own voice. Her mother didn't answer right away. She simply looked at her for a long moment before letting out a deep sigh. It was as if she carried an enormous burden, a truth that could no longer be hidden. Sarah could see that her mother was emotionally shaken, something far more serious than she had imagined. "Sarah, you need to know the truth," her mother said at last. "You don't know everything about your father, and there's something very important you need to understand about our family, about your connection to the Changs." Sarah froze. She had always known there was something different about her. Family story, a part of the past that had never been fully explained. But she never imagined the answers would be so close. A wave of heat ran up her spine, mixed with growing fear. "What are you saying, Mom?" Sarah's voice was quieter now, trying to process her mother's words. Her mother took a deep breath, her expression tense. "Your father isn't who you think he is, Sarah," she began, and her words hit Sarah like a hammer to the chest. "He's not just a businessman. He was involved with the Chang family in a much deeper way than you can imagine. And you are the daughter of a much larger agreement, something that involves much more than money." Sarah stared at her, completely lost. "What? What do you mean?" she asked, her mind spinning, trying to understand. Her mother hesitated, looking down at the floor, as if trying to summon the courage to finally reveal what had been hidden for so long. "When your father met the Changs, he made a deal with David's grandfather. They were allies in business, and at some point it became more than just a professional partnership. Your father made a pact with David's grandfather, and you were part of that pact." Sarah's mother looked up at her, finally meeting her, daughter's eyes with a look full of regret. "You, Sarah, are the legitimate daughter of Chang Li, David's grandfather." Those words echoed in Sarah's mind. She couldn't process what she was hearing. The legitimate daughter of Chang Li. That meant she was, on some level, part of the Chang family lineage. Her connection to David was deeper and far more complicated than she had ever imagined. "Are you saying that—" Sarah began, but the words failed her. "That I'm related to David?" Her mother nodded slowly. "Yes. Not by direct bloodline, but you are part of the agreement that united our families. Your original name wasn't Johnson, it was Chang. When your father stepped away from the family business, he changed your name to protect you, to keep you away from that life. But whenever a legitimate heir of the Chang family was to marry, the secret was to be revealed. David, as part of that agreement, married you without knowing the full truth. He didn't know who you really were, but you've always been a part of his legacy." Sarah felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Her mother's words were like a devastating storm. She was closer to the Chang family than she had ever imagined, and David, the man she had married, was more than just a husband forced upon her by an arrangement. He was trapped in a cycle of inheritance he barely understood himself. But what did that mean for her? And more importantly, what did it mean for their relationship? "But why didn't you ever tell me this?" Sarah asked, the pain and frustration evident in her voice. "Why did you keep me in the dark?" Her mother looked away, guilt in her eyes. "I wanted you to have a normal life, Sarah," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't want you dragged into the Chang world with all its lies and manipulation. But now, things have changed. I couldn't keep it from you any longer." Sarah felt her head spin. The pieces were falling into place, but the full picture was still far from clear. The revelation of her true identity changed everything, not just for her, but for her marriage to David. How could she face him now? How could she trust him, when her entire life seemed to be built on lies? She stood up, feeling an urgent need to make sense of everything. "I need to talk to David," she said, without looking at her mother, who continued watching her, still worried. When Sarah got home, she was overwhelmed by a mix of anger, confusion, and helplessness. She had been thrown into this game without knowing anything. Her life, her feelings, and her future were now tied to a secret she hadn't even known existed. But one thing was clear. Her marriage to David would never be the same. She didn't know how, but now more than ever, she needed to uncover the full truth. And the truth she knew would come out, one way or another. The night was colder than Sarah had expected when she walked into the house. Every step she took felt like an added weight on her shoulders, as if the revelations about her past had irreparably changed something between her and David. She was now fully aware of her role in the game the Chang family had imposed on them both. She was no longer just a woman with a future of her own. She was part of something much bigger and darker, something she barely understood. David, on the other hand, was in the living room, lying on the couch with a glass of whiskey in his hand. His gaze was distant, as if he were trying to detach himself from something he could no longer control. When Sarah entered, he didn't move, didn't look at her. He seemed to be waiting for her, but the silence between them now was heavier than any words they could exchange. "I know what you found out," David said first, his voice deeper than usual. Sarah looked at him, feeling the tension rise between them. She didn't know where to start. She didn't know if she should be furious or simply heartbroken. She had believed she might find some truth amidst it all, but now all she felt was a growing void. "You knew, didn't you?" Sarah asked, her voice tense but controlled. "You knew who I really am but never told me. Never gave me the chance to choose for myself." David looked at her for the first time that night, his eyes empty of any emotion, as if he were fighting something inside himself. He knew what she said was true. He knew the lie had started the moment she entered his life, the moment their families orchestrated their marriage. But at the same time, he saw himself cornered. He was already trapped by the family, by the legacy, and that had blinded him to everything else, to what truly mattered. "I didn't know, Sarah. I didn't know any of it." His voice was softer now, almost a whisper. "I was the first to be deceived. Believe me, I never knew you were connected to my family." Sarah took a deep breath. The anger was building inside her, but there was something else. A thread of doubt. Something that made her question whether he was, in fact, telling the truth. But the truth was hard to swallow, especially now. "Then explain it to me, David. How can you say you didn't know? You knew everything you had to do to secure your inheritance. You knew I was just another piece on your chessboard, another woman to make sure your fortune stayed intact." The silence that followed was long. David didn't know how to respond. He had married her because of family pressure, yes, but what did he truly feel for Sarah? He didn't know, and that bothered him more than he wanted to admit. "I'm not a piece in your game anymore, David," Sarah said, her voice firm now. "You can lie to me, you can manipulate me, but now I know who I am and why I'm here. I'm not the woman you thought I was." David stood up suddenly, the tension between them exploding into the confrontation they could no longer avoid. "I never wanted you to be just a piece," he said, his voice cracking, his eyes locked on hers. I didn't know what to do, Sarah. I was trapped by my family's expectations, trapped by my own choices, and you came along and everything changed. But I can't change everything now. I can't just ignore what's at stake." He stopped, looking at her, seeing the pain in her eyes. He no longer knew who he was, who she was in the equation, or if there was any future left for the two of them. He wanted to believe there was something between them, but the lies, the games, the pressure, it all felt crushing. Sarah looked at him, her own emotions tangled in pain, anger, and above all, a deep sadness. She had fallen in love with him, yes, but she also knew she had fallen for a version of him that no longer existed. The David she thought she knew was just a construct, a facade. He wasn't the strong, secure man she had imagined. He was a broken man, and she no longer knew if she could keep living that lie. "I can't do this anymore," she said, the words coming out like a whisper, but with a strength she hadn't known she possessed. "I can't live in a marriage where the only thing that matters is what's at stake, where love means nothing." David stood still for a moment, his eyes on her, as if trying to absorb what she had just said. And then, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders, he finally said, "I understand. I really do, Sarah." He stepped back, his shoulders slumping, defeated. "I don't know what to do anymore." Sarah watched him for a moment. He was no longer the powerful man, the tycoon she once imagined, but rather a lost man just as confused as she was. They were both at a breaking point, and what would happen next was something neither of them could predict. She took a step toward the door, her body heavy with the weight of what she had just said. She knew this wasn't the end, but she also knew that from this moment on, nothing would be as it seemed. They were on a path of separation, not by choice, but by truth. The lie, the secret, the truth that had finally surfaced. It was now between them, and there was no going back. Before stepping out the door, Sarah turned and looked at him one last time. "I hope that one day you figure out what truly matters," she said, her voice low but filled with meaning. David stood there watching her leave, not knowing if there was anything he could do to stop what was coming. He knew he was losing Sarah, but more than that, he was losing himself in the process. The cold wind cut through the city that night, as if the universe itself were reflecting the turmoil inside David. He walked through the empty streets of Los Angeles, his mind a whirlwind. What was he doing with his life? With his marriage? With Sarah? The weight of Sarah's decision was still etched in his mind. When she walked out, it felt like he had been ripped out of his own home, his own life. But something inside him had broken in a way he didn't know how to fix. He knew she was right. He had always lived in the shadow of his family, in the shadow of what was expected of him, without ever really allowing himself to live as who he truly was. Now, he knew he had lost something he could never recover, unless he went after it. But the road to redemption wasn't simple. For David, the truth about his own past was a prison. He knew he had failed in so many ways, but if there was a chance to fix his relationship with Sarah, he would have to change everything he thought he knew about his world, his legacy, and what really mattered to him. The next morning, Sarah woke up early, as usual, but something felt different. She didn't know exactly what it was, but she felt that the previous night had changed something. She knew that by leaving the house, she had taken a step toward something new, a new future, maybe. But what would that future be? She was full of questions, yet at the same time, she felt that she needed to walk alone, no matter how painful it was. She grabbed her bag, and, as she stepped out of the house, she noticed her mind was calmer than it had been in days. She knew that taking that step, despite the pain, was necessary. She could no longer live for others. She could no longer be someone who sacrificed herself for power or for the expectations of a family that never saw her as a real person. As she walked down the street, her mind drifting through these thoughts, her phone vibrated. It was a message from David. "We need to talk. Please give me a chance to explain what I couldn't say yesterday." Sarah hesitated. The pain was still fresh, but at the same time a part of her knew it couldn't end like this. She needed to hear what he had to say, even if she knew his. Words couldn't erase what had happened. But maybe there was something deeper, something they both still needed to understand. She didn't reply immediately, but decided she needed to see him. If she was going to move forward, she needed to understand who he really was, and whether there was a chance to rebuild something, anything, between them. That afternoon she went to David's apartment. When he saw her walk in, his heart tightened. She looked different. There was a quiet strength in her eyes now, something he hadn't noticed before. He knew he was losing her, and he didn't want to lose anything else. He didn't want to be a man lost in the control of his family's legacy. "I know I can't erase what happened," David began, his voice softer than he expected. "I messed up, Sarah, in so many ways. I messed up with you, with us." He stepped closer to her, his gaze serious and vulnerable. "But I need to tell you that since the moment you walked into my life, everything changed. I didn't know what to do with this feeling, with the pain of watching you walk away. I didn't know what to do with what I feel for you." Sarah watched him in silence. Every word he spoke felt heavier than simple regret. She saw him there, standing before her, trying in some way to make amends, but at the same time, she knew it couldn't be easy for him. He was in the same process of self-discovery that she was going through. But would that be enough? "You only realize that now, David?" Sarah said, her voice tense. "After everything we've been through, after all the lies, I had to leave for you to see it." David swallowed hard. He knew he didn't have easy answers, but he wanted her to know somehow that he was willing to try. "Yes, I did realize it, And I know I can't erase what happened, but I want to be a better man. I want to be the man you deserve, Sarah. Not the one you thought I was, but someone real. Someone who respects you, who loves you for who you are." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. His words, though sincere, weren't enough to erase what she had already been through. But there was something in him, something between the lines of what he was saying that made her hesitate. She took a step toward him, looking at him intently. I don't know, David. I can't keep going with a man who didn't know who I really am. And you did know on some level that I wasn't just any woman." She paused for a moment, her voice cracking slightly. "But if you really are willing to change, maybe we can try. I just can't promise anything. What we've had so far doesn't make me believe in the future." David felt the pain in her words, but at the same time, there was a spark of hope. He knew she was right. There were no easy promises. He couldn't change the past, but he could do things differently from now on. "I know. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I know I messed up and that I lost your trust, but if you give me a chance, I want to show you that I can be better. And it's not about inheritance, it's not about money. It's about us." Sarah looked at him deeply, her emotions in turmoil. She wanted to believe him, but she knew it would be a hard road. She too would have to change, let go of the weight of the past and find her own voice within this relationship. "Let's try. But like you said, it's not about what we have, it's about who we are. We need to find ourselves first." David took a step toward her, not knowing what the future would bring, but feeling for the first time that he was doing the right thing. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew this was the first step. The soft morning light streamed into David's apartment, but there was something different about that day. The air was heavy with expectation, a stillness that reflected the silent changes that had taken place in the previous weeks. Sarah, who had never quite felt at ease in this space, now walked through the room with a sense of belonging, as if something was finally falling into place. But there was still much to be decided. She knew that what was to come wouldn't be easy, but at least now she felt free to choose her own destiny. David was sitting at the coffee table, his gaze fixed on the notes and documents scattered before him. He was surrounded by the family business, but unlike the other days, his mind wasn't on power or wealth. His focus was on Sarah, on how she had changed everything for him, and on the most important decision of his life. What would he choose? Now? To uphold the family legacy, or follow the path he felt was truest to himself? He knew the two worlds couldn't coexist without something being left behind. Sarah slowly approached, sitting down across from him. The barrier between them was gone, as it had been before. Words and gestures were simpler now, but filled with meaning. They had reached a point where what united them was stronger than any external convention or expectation. "Have you decided?" Sarah asked, her voice calm but filled with expectation. She knew this was the moment of definition. She no longer wanted to live with uncertainties. She wanted a clear answer. And she also wanted to know if David was willing to make the choice that was truly his, and not just an obligation. David raised his eyes to hers, his expression more open than in any other moment they had shared. He sighed, still processing the mixed feelings in his mind. But then, with a lightness he hadn't imagined feeling before, he spoke. "I've decided." He paused, the words weighing differently now. "I can't keep being a man who lives for the expectations of others. I can't just be the man who follows the family legacy without questioning what's right for me. I love you, Sarah. And, as important as the family's inheritance and business are, none of that makes sense if I'm not able to live my own life by your side." Sarah looked at him, a wave of relief and emotion catching her by surprise. It was the answer she needed to hear, but at the same time, the one she feared not hearing. She felt vulnerable, but also, for the first time, hopeful. "So you're going to give up everything?" she asked, almost in a whisper. Not because she wanted him to choose between her and the inheritance, but because she knew the decision he was about to make wouldn't be easy. David took a deep breath, the decision finally made. He knew he couldn't continue in this game. The business, the fortune, the pressure, none of it had any meaning compared to what he truly desired. "I'm not giving up everything, Sarah," he said, with a genuine smile for the first time in a long time. "But I'm going to do things differently. I'll fight for what I believe in, for what is real. I won't follow the family's path just because it's expected. I'll carve my own way by your side. I don't know what the future holds, but I want to face it with you." Sarah smiled, a sincere smile, though still filled with emotion. She knew this moment meant more than just words. It was the promise of a new beginning. Their lives would never be the same, but what mattered now was what they would do with this new chance. "I don't know what the future holds for us either, David," she said, but her voice was calm. "But finally, I feel ready for whatever comes. With you." They sat in silence for a moment, both reflecting on the choices they had made and the weight of those words. The future, with all its uncertainties and challenges, lay ahead of them. But now, there was a sense of freedom, a freedom to build something genuine, something that was theirs alone. And so, amid all the external pressures and the shadows of the past, David and Sarah were ready to write a new story. Not one of inheritance, wealth and power, but a story built on mutual respect, growth, and above all, love. The Chang family legacy was no longer tied to fortune, but to what they chose to become together. Sarah looked at David, her eyes shining, with a hope she had never imagined having. He looked at her the same way, with a smile that said more than words could express. They were ready for the future, ready to face whatever came together, and for the first time, both knew that no matter the challenges, they had made the right choice.